welcome to this Parks Algebra 1 class. This is Chapter 3, Section 3, Part 2 of Section 3. Okay, so yesterday we talked about rate of change, so we're going to talk about slope today. So find slope. So slope is actually the same thing as rate of change. The slope of a non-vertical line is the ratio of the change in the y-coordinates, rise, to change in the x-coordinates, run, as you move from one point to another. It can be used to describe a rate of change. Slope describes how steep a line is. The greater the absolute value of the slope, the steeper the line. So you're going to hear me say rise over run about 1,000,000 times throughout Algebra 1. So rise over run. So when you find slope, you're going to do the rise over run. So the graph shows a line that passes through -1, 3 and 2, -2. Okay. So there's 2 points here. So the 2 point, well, let's use yellow here. So the 2 points here and here. Okay. So from one point to another, I want to find out how many of these boxes I raised and how many I run. So let's count from here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's why I have 5 here. And then you run to the left. You have 1, 2, 3. So you have 3 at the bottom. Now, when you run to the left, you're running to the negative. So you have to make sure when you run to the left, it's going to be a negative. You add a negative to it. That's why you have a negative. -5/3. Okay, so that's a slope. Okay, when we're talking about slope, it's describing how steep this is. So how many you run and how many you rise and how many you run. So you have -5/3. That is the slope. It's also called the rate of change, the constant rate of change. So again, slope. The slope of a non-vertical line is the ratio of the rise to the run. So how many did you rise and how many did you run? Okay, the slope m of a non-vertical line through any 2 points, x1, y1, and x2, y2, can be found as follows. So it's really the rate of change from here to here. Okay, if you don't have those little boxes, then you know this one is y1 and this point up here is y2. So this change, this distance here, can be calculated by doing y2 over y1. Same goes for the x. The distance from here to here, you can calculate by doing x2 minus x1. So here is now your formula for your slope, y2 over y1, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so that's how we're going to calculate these slopes here. Okay, if you have a nice graph, you can actually count the rise and run. But if you don't have a graph and they just give you 2 points, then you can still calculate it by doing this equation here. Alright, here's an example. Find the slope of a line that passes through each pair of points. So here are your 2 pair of points. Okay, and you're going to do y2 over y1 over x2 minus x1. So again, if you have a graph and you graph it, you can just find those 2 points and count how many you rise. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's why you have 5 on the top here. And then you have how many you ran. 1, 2, 3. So you ran 3. So you have 5/3. So that's your slope. 5/3 is your slope. But if you, let's write that 3 again. But if you don't have a graph and you don't have any graphing paper or anything, and you just have those 2 points, those 2 coordinates, then you can still calculate by doing y1. So let's say this is x1, y1, x2, y2. So 5 minus 0, and then 1 minus the -2. Okay, then you can still calculate that and get 5 over 3. So you see here it's the same thing. You can either do it by looking at the graph and counting how many run and rise over run, or you can do it by doing x2 minus x1, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Alright, so here's another example. So if you want to do the equation, so y2 minus the y1 is what we have here, negative 3 minus 4. And then the y is 2 minus negative 3. So you're going to always subtract the x's together and the y's together. So you have negative 3 minus 4, 2 minus negative 3. So you got to be careful when you have a negative number here, because you're minusing also a negative. So that would be a plus, 2 plus 3, which would be 5. So here you have negative 7 over 5. You can do the same thing with the graph. You can count. So rise. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I ran to the left, so it's going to be a negative. So left is always a negative. Okay? So same way, same answer, two different ways. So here's another example, just in case you didn't get that one. So here's y2 minus y1, negative 1 minus negative 1 over x2 minus x1, 2 minus negative 3. Excuse me. So here you have negative 1 minus negative 1. So that becomes negative 1 plus 1, which becomes 0 over 2, which is the same thing as 0. Okay, so this one has no slope. It has a 0 for slope. So there's your graph. Okay, it's just going through a negative 1. Okay. So here's your turn, numbers 4a through 4f. I know it's a lot of problems, but it's really easy. So let's just do one together. 8 minus 6 on the top, which becomes 2. 4 minus 3 on the bottom, which becomes 1. So the slope is 2. Okay, so that was easy. So go ahead to numbers 4a through 4f. Okay, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more here, and then when you're done, come back. Okay, welcome back. So there's going to be some slopes that look a little funky. Find the slope of a line that passes through these 2 points. So you graph the 2 points, negative 2 and 4. Okay, that's a point right there. And then you have negative 2 and negative 3. Point right there. When you graph those 2 points together, it has one straight line. And this is something that's called undefined. Okay. Before, when you had 0 over a slope, a number, the slope is 0. Because you can have 0 over a number. But when you have a number over 0, you can't have negative 7 out of nothing. You can have nothing out of 2, that makes it 0. But you can't have a number over 0. So that is called undefined. And that will look like a straight line, a vertical line. Okay? Undefined slope. Alright, so here's your turn, number 5a and 5b. So go ahead and tell me if they have a 0 slope. If you have a 0 over a number, this slope is 0. If you have a number over 0, this is undefined. Undefined. Okay. And that is a 0. Okay. So go ahead and do 4, 5, and 4b, and come back when you're done. Alright, so let's summarize what we learned so far. These are all different slopes. So if you notice, if you have a trend going upward, okay, from left to right, it's going up, it's called a positive slope. If you have a slope that's going from right to left, it's going no from it's going down from left to right. Okay, so but it's going upward toward the left side. Remember, when you rise and then you ran to the left, it was a negative. So that's your negative slope. If you have a horizontal line going sideways, it's a slope of 0. If you have a vertical line going up and down, it's an undefined slope. Okay. Alright. Sometimes they'll give you the slope and then ask you what the coordinate is. Okay, so we're going backwards here. So they're telling you the slope is 1/3, and they did r minus 4, and then negative 5 minus 1 on the bottom. So then we're going to solve this equation to find out what r is, right here. So what we do here is negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6 here. And then we're going to do cross multiply. We have negative r minus 4 times 3. And then you're going to do 1 times negative 6. Okay, so we just cross multiplied. Now we have a distribution, distribute property. So 3 times r, 3r, minus 3 times 4, 12, equals negative 6. And you solve, you add 12 to each side, 3r equals 6, divide by 3, and r equals 2. So r is 2, so it goes through line negative 5 and 2. Alright, so here's your turn, 6a and 6b. So they're telling you what the slope is, okay? And you need to find out what the point is. So here, I'm going to set it up for you. So the slope is negative 5, but that's also the same, negative 5 over 1. Any number is the same thing as over 1. y2 minus y1, negative 4 minus 6, over r minus negative 2. Okay? Now you're going to cross multiply. But before you do that, I'm going to make that into plus 2. So now you have negative 5 over 1 equals negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10 over r plus 2. Now you're going to cross multiply and solve for r. What I would suggest you do before that, just make this into positive by multiplying each side by negative 1. So now you have 5 times, oh my gosh, I realize I'm doing the whole problem for you. So now just solve for r and tell me what r equals, okay? And next one, 6b, you need to do that one on your own. And when you're done, make sure you put this nicely in your book bag and hand it in for credit tomorrow. Okay, thanks for watching.